I first came across CANTAB almost exactly to the week, half a lifetime ago, when I came here to Cambridge to do a PhD with Barbara and Trevor. And during my PhD, I used the relatively new tool that was CANTAB to look at cognitive function in schizophrenia and in depression. And in people with depression, I found that they were impaired on pretty much all of the cognitive tests that we looked at. So here are some CANTAB tests. 0 is the control mean, and these are standard deviations from the control mean, so that you can see people with depression impaired pretty much across the board. But there were 2 tests that stood out as particularly sensitive: the delayed matching to sample test and what was then the new Tower of London and has morphed into the one-touch stockings of Cambridge in the current CANTAB battery. These very different tests. Whoops, don't know what's happened there. So the delayed matching to sample test is a test of short-term memory, which we know depends on the intact function of the temporal lobes, whereas the one-touch stocking test is a test of problem solving, which depends on intact frontal cortices. So very different, and it's unusual for these 2 tests to go together. But what struck us was there is a similarity in the way that these 2 tests are presented. In both these tests you see a problem. You choose from an array of different possible answers. If you're correct, you get a tick and a happy tune. If you're incorrect, you get a cross, and essentially the computer blows a raspberry at you. So we figured that if you were somebody that was disproportionately affected by this negative feedback, such that it had a detrimental effect on the next task in the sequence, it would be these 2 tests that were particularly sensitive. And we tested that and found some evidence that this was indeed the case. So it was this discovery that there is an intrinsic emotional influence on a cold cognitive task that really set my course for the intervening years. So ever since then, really, I've been interested in looking at affective cognition, emotional cognition, in the context of psychiatric disorders. And we've come to understand that these aspects of cognition are really fundamental to the neurobehavioural pathology of a whole range of psychiatric disorders. They relate very closely to symptoms such as anhedonia, rumination, impulse control that we see across the spectrum of psychiatry. They also relate closely to functional outcomes, so they're very important targets for treatments and interventions that will not only improve people's symptoms, but also improve their outcomes. Affective cognition is not a unitary concept. It's a multifaceted, multidimensional construct that involves, although is not limited to, these kind of domains, so reward and motivation, emotion processing, impulsivity, and social cognition. And there is no battery that has a comprehensive assessment of all of these things available at the moment. And about 5 years, a group of us, including Barbara and Trevor here, Mittel, who's still here somewhere or tweeting from somewhere else, I don't know, and John Reuser at UCL, decided that it was time to address this and to try and come up with a standardised instrument to assess affective cognition in a research context and also in clinical trials. And to do this, importantly, using the principles that have worked so well for CANTAB, the principles of coming up with tasks that are reliable, repeatable, engaging, easy to administer by people with limited or even no training, tasks with multiple outcome measures, and importantly, tasks that have some degree of neural validity based on animal models, work in people with circumscribed brain damage, or in our case, work from functional imaging. So about 3 years ago now, we were lucky enough to get some funding from the MRC to develop this battery, which we now term the emoticon battery. People keep asking me why emoticon, and I have to confess, I can't quite remember. In sort of true scientific tradition, we had a meeting where we did some chaotic brainstorming. We'd all got up a bit early, we'd had too much coffee, too much sugar, and we were shouting things randomly. Someone said emoticon, and everyone went, yes, great. I think it was you, Trevor, but so it's his fault. So emoticon, anyway, and it allowed Amy to come up with some fantastic graphics for us as well. So this is a task that tries, a set of 16 tasks that try to assess the 4 different domains that we identified. I don't have time to go through all the tasks, so I'll just show you a few to give you a flavour of what we've been doing. So the first task I'm going to show you is a face go-no-go task. It takes the affective go-no task from the CANTAB, but rather than using words, uses faces. This is in the emotion processing domain. So very straightforward. We show people happy and sad faces. In one condition, they're told to press a button to go if the face is happy and withhold the response no go if it's sad. That's what's here. And we also have a reverse condition and some conditions with neutral faces thrown in as well. Has some advantages over the classic affective go-no-go task in that it doesn't depend on language. It's much more useful with children for that reason. So that's an example from the emotion processing domain. In the reward and motivation domain, we have various tasks. One of them is a monetary incentive task that was largely developed by John Reuser at UCL. In this, people see a cue of some sort, and it's either a cue that predicts a win of high or low value, or a cue that predicts a loss, again, of high or low value, or it's a neutral cue. There's not going to be any consequence. Then after a variable delay, they see a target square, they press a button as quickly as they can, either to win the money or to avoid losing the money. And so we have a measure of their incentive motivation there. In the impulsivity domain, we have a couple of tasks, one of which is a variant of the classic delay discounting task, where people are presented with choices. Would you prefer a large win after a delay period or a smaller win right now? And by varying the amounts to be won and the delays that people have to wait, we can get a measure of how tolerant they are of delay in order to get a bigger win later on. Now, those three domains, these ones, were relatively straightforward. There were some tasks out there, things to be adapted, things to be worked on. The social cognition domain presented a little bit more of a challenge. There are obviously some fantastic social cognition paradigms out there. You've just heard about Molly's wonderful work in this area. But what we wanted was things that were very short and sweet, that fitted in with those Cambridge principles of ease of delivery, and that makes it very, very tricky. So we had a go and came up with a range of tasks. This is one example. This is our social information task. In this, people are shown a cartoon scene, and there are some bits of information that are unavailable to them at the start. So everybody involved has a thought bubble, which is blank. Their faces are pixelated out, and there are also some bits of information here, here and here, which are blanked out as well. And their task is to pick 4 pieces of information that they would like to help them resolve this ambiguous situation and to work out what's going on. They can pick any 4 that they want. This is, whoops, go a bit farther. This is a fairly typical pattern. So this individual picked the 3 thought bubbles and this bit of information up here, which gives you more information about what's happening, but still leaves things slightly ambiguous. And what we're interested in is the types of information they pick, and then their assessment of what they think is going on in the scene. So in this scene, they can either choose the man is making him a cup of tea to congratulate him, a fairly low-key celebration of this chap's promotion, or they can choose that the man is putting poison in his tea, obviously something that happens in research labs and offices around the country on a daily basis, or a neutral outcome, there's no more milk left for the tea, which genuinely does happen in research labs and offices around the country on a daily basis. So that's one task. We also have a couple of tasks that are adaptations of classic neuroeconomic paradigms. So this is a variant on the ultimatum game, where we use some avatars in a little attempt at gamification, just for Jim. People work, so you choose your own avatar, you choose who you want to play against, you work together, you make some money, the money's put in a pot, and then the other person decides how the money's going to be split, and you're given an offer. So in this case, you've got a fair player who offers to split it equally with you, but there's also examples where it's unfair and they offer you only 10% and they get to keep 90% or something like that. And you can either accept that offer, in which case you both get that money, or you can reject it, in which case you both get nothing. So essentially you're paying to punish them for being unfair. And to my great surprise, people pretty reliably do this if they think the offer is unfair. They sacrifice their own winnings in order to punish other people. So that just gives you a flavour of some of the tasks we have. What we've done so far is to do a validation study in 200 healthy controls, quite young, mid-20s, but otherwise a fairly representative sample. 42 of these people were tested twice so that we could get some test-retest reliability data. We did a factor analysis, we looked at test-retest reliability, and we also looked at correlations with demographic factors. The fact that you can't read the details of this really doesn't matter. The point of this is the factor analysis, that from these tasks, with a range of measures, we identified 11 factors. These things are not all measuring the same thing. They're not all mapping onto the same factor. There's a complicated factor structure here. It is genuinely getting at a multifaceted construct. In terms of the test-retest reliability, we looked at 25 measures. 10 of them had excellent test-retest reliability, 10 were moderate to good, and 5 were pretty poor. These were generally learning measures which typically don't do well under test-retest reliability. We also looked at correlations with demographic factors, found very little actually. Face recognition correlates positively with age. We're better at identifying happiness as we get older. Who knew? Delay discounting goes along with IQ. Higher IQ people are generally speaking better at tolerating a longer delay for the reward. Surprisingly, there was very, very little in the way of sex differences. The one exception to this was there was a massive correlation between sex and guilt in a moral dilemma paradigm. I think it will surprise no one to know that women were much more likely to say that they felt guilty than men. So, the emoticon battery, as far as we've got up to date, we've shown that there is very little redundancy in this battery based on our 11-factor structure. There is moderate to excellent test-retest reliability on the majority, if not the vast majority, of measures in the battery. There are very limited correlations with age, sex and IQ, which are useful features of a battery like this. It's also very well tolerated. People found the tasks engaging, they enjoyed them. Those that came back were happy to do so. We've also got some evidence from work we've done with schools and at science festivals that they can be done very well by children. Although I would caution any parent in the audience, never watch your own children do tasks like this, because you will call all your parenting skills into question immediately. So going forward, several of the tasks aren't quite right yet. They need some refinement, they need some further work. We also crucially need to show that the tests are sensitive to neuropsychiatric disorders, and we have another number of collaborations underway, including collaborations with some people in the audience here, to try and address this. We also need to show that the tests are sensitive to interventions, and we're just starting a project in Manchester to do that with 3 different pharmacological interventions. Also, importantly, we need to consider cross-cultural validity. Certainly in the social cognitive domain, I would expect there to be some quite strong cultural issues that we need to consider, and we haven't addressed that at all as yet. And finally, just finish with some thank yous. So the Emoticom team, it's been great fun working with Trevor and Barbara and Mittel again, as well as John Reuser. I should acknowledge Amy Bland and Taya Shai, who are both here today and really did all the work on this and did a fantastic job, so thank you both very much. To the people who collaborated with us, Marcus, Ian, Valerie, Daniel and Essie, who kindly shared stimuli and tasks, and Richard, who helped with the statistics. And finally to Cambridge Cognition, who were involved from the start here and provided us with all sorts of advice and support, which has been invaluable along the way. And we're looking forward to working with them more closely as we try and take this forward. Thank you.